So I framed this as a ranking video, but where a normal ranking video is basically there just for entertainment or maybe to start an argument in the comments, I do have a more specific, useful goal here, which is to have the video series serve as a guide for people who can't afford to buy all of the large box sets that have been released over the last decade or so, which together make up the definitive packaging of the King Crimson Legacy. Or either people who can't afford to buy all those boxes or people who can't afford to buy them all right away and are trying to figure out what order to purchase them in, right? And I do see a lot of people online. I'm in a lot of the prog rock Facebook groups, etc. I see a lot of people online who are interested in these large boxes, but who aren't really sure if the experience is worth it, particularly for those boxes that have not been repressed recently and might be fetching a little bit more right now on the secondary market. Now, I happened to get interested in these sets during a period when I had enough disposable income to pick them all up over the course of a year, right? And that hasn't been true of a lot of my life. It's probably not something I could do now, but at the time it was something I felt like I was able to do without sacrificing much of anything else. So I thought it would be interesting to do sort of a buyer's guide, which can serve either as a priority list if you're not able to get them all, or a proposed sequence if you're going to be getting them over a longer period of time while you manage your finances. Or if you're wanting to kind of dip into that world, but you're not sure if you're going to be able to afford them all. So the goal is to suggest a sequence which, first will bring you the most joy for your money, on the assumption that your money is somewhat limited, and second will, as a sequence, will keep you relatively engaged as a listener and will kind of reduce the burnout and fatigue that can come inevitably with, these box sets of 20-odd discs of live material from the same period. So the order that I'm suggesting here is as much about that sense of variety as it is about quality, right? So for instance, I've put Road to Red fairly far down the sequence. I've put Starless at the beginning. That's not because Road to Red is worse per se. It's a fantastic collection of music, obviously. It's more because Road to Red and Starless, the song selection, the style, those things are very similar. And for me, I found probably my listening experience honestly would have been better with those if I'd spread them out a bit more. The same thing goes for the box sets which cover the different Adrian Belew eras, right? I mean, 3/8 of the sets are Belew focused, and there's some repetition in material between those, right? So I tried to propose an order that would reduce that kind of repetition as well. And I'll also try to suggest cheaper alternatives to each of these boxes if you're interested in a particular set, but you don't quite have the budget, or if you're just trying to get an essential Crimson collection with relatively tight funds. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We're a contemporary art rock project which focuses on complexity of theme and composition, balanced with accessibility and emotional nuance. If you can't afford any King Crimson box sets at all, you can save yourself some money by checking out our album playlists here on YouTube, or looking us up on your favorite streaming service. Or, if you have $7 or $8 set aside, you can find us on Bandcamp. So I'm going to split this into 3 videos. The first will be this intro and some general kind of caveats and thoughts about collecting these box sets. Also, just a little bit of background about my own subjective relationship to this stuff. I'll also have a review of Starless, which is my suggestion for the starting point and really is, a necessary purchase no matter what in a pawn your wedding ring sort of way. Part 2, I'll be discussing the sets On and Off the Road, Sailor's Tales, and Heaven and Earth, all of which contain quite a lot of brilliant material and all of which will give you a really great amount of joy for your limited buying dollar. And then part 3 will cover Road to Red, which is an astounding set, but, does have a lot of overlap with Starless in terms of material and style, and the complete Thrack, complete Lark's Tongues, and complete 69 box sets, which are maybe a bit more for scholars and completists. Now, like I mentioned, a few caveats I want to get out of the way first. If you have huge preferences by era, then obviously that would change the calculation for you, right? I've met some people who only like the 70s stuff. I've met some people who only like the Baloo stuff, more of those than you might expect, actually. If that's the case, obviously, if you're really only interested in a narrow slice of King Crimson history, this video is probably not really for you. Personally, I do love the Wetton era the most, but really just by a pretty slight edge. And the Baloo and Sinfield eras basically are a tie for me. And I'm also a little bit more fond of the kind of late era, construction of light, power to believe stuff. I'm a little more fond of those than a lot of people because, that material came out when I was in high school and early college. Construction of Light actually was the first album I ever bought after getting a driver's license, when I could just, if I read about something cool, I could just jump in my own car and go get it, right? So, I'm very fond of, very attached to, very respectful of every era of King Crimson in different ways. And I'm assuming that viewers of this video probably would be as well. Now, most of the live material on these sets is available through as download through Discipline Global Mobile. If you've already downloaded some of those sets, or if you've picked up certain dates on King Crimson Collectors Club CDs, that might change the calculation for you, either if you already know a particular era pretty well, or alternately, if you have kind of overexposed yourself to a particular era and maybe you want to avoid that one for a while. At the time I bought these sets, I knew all the King Crimson studio albums quite well. I had most of the key live albums, your Absent Lovers, USA, Earthbound, whatever. But I didn't have the Wilson mixes or the 5.1 mixes, and I didn't have a lot of experience with just listening to a random King Crimson show front to back, right? So I'm assuming that same basic level of expertise and experience is probably true of anyone who might be using this as a buyer's guide. Ultimately, I know more about King Crimson than most people I've ever met, but probably still less than, a lot of people on the internet who've been buying every show ever posted by DGM or whatever, So I'm someone with I guess like a high intermediate level of Crimson knowledge. And I'm roughly pitching the video to somebody with the same amount, right? If you're a moderator on a King Crimson forum, this may not be as interesting to you. The last thing I would say is if you're going to buy any of these boxes, before you do, I would actually start by getting Sid Smith's book In the Court of King Crimson. In addition to being a really good biography, which will give you a sense of the kind of surrounding context of the live material, it also includes an annotated gigography. The booklets for these box sets, they do have some biographical material, which I believe is actually, in most cases, taken straight from Smith's book. But the Smith book has, like I mentioned, an annotated gigography, which gives you more of a sense about, which sets are better nights than others, right? Which songs might be highlights in a particular set. Which gigs have something unusual that happens in them, like a mistake or a version of a song that's radically different from the normal one. I actually didn't have that book my first time buying and listening to these sets, and, they were a bit overwhelming in certain ways. So I did find that book to be a great enhancement to the experience, especially for the 70s sets, which are really mostly just a giant mass of gigs, and which don't have actually a lot of, the booklets don't have a lot of details about, aspects of specific gigs beyond where they were recorded and what was played. Last thing I would say is I'm not including the Exposures box set in this list. because I don't have it. And I probably won't buy it unless I get some kind of unexpected windfall, frankly. My finances now don't really look the way that they did when I bought all these sets a few years ago. And there are other things that would be, if I did have that extra money, there are probably other things that would be further ahead on the list, like the Van der Graaf Charisma Years box or the Caravan box that came out a few months ago. And, I suspect that anybody who would consider buying that exposures box probably already has all these boxes. And I can't imagine that person, wanting exposures and not wanting all of these. So I don't necessarily feel like it invalidates the video that I am leaving exposures out. So if you only have the money to pick up one of these big King Crimson box sets, or if you're just not sure that they're generally something you're interested in, or you're unsure where to start in the sequence, Starless would be my wholehearted recommendation. And this was not the first of the sets that I personally bought, but it was the set which sold me on the whole idea of these sets and actually gave me the resolution to go out and get them all. And ultimately, it just comes down to how good this lineup was live. They have a reputation as one of the best live bands of all time, in any genre ever, full stop. And for me, I'd known for a long time that they had that reputation, but it was this set that really gave me a full sense of why they had that reputation and led me to kind of wholeheartedly agree with it instead of just sort of go along with it because it was a historical consensus. And that strength is not just about the quality of any individual moment. It's really more about if you listen to a bunch of examples of this particular lineup, then you really start to see how fully they live within the songs while they're performing them, how that gives the songs a constant freshness every time they're played. Now, you hear a lot about this lineup that, audiences at the time often couldn't tell the difference between the improv and the composed songs. That's a common thing to say about this lineup. And, usually I think that's meant as a statement about how good the improv was, or how seamlessly they could transition from the improv into a composed song. But for me, I think that idea is also meaningful as a reflection on the way that they seem to be newly discovering each of these songs every time they play it, right? Each of the players in this lineup has a style which allows lots of variation in the details of those songs. And the variations combined with the room within the composed songs for improv really cumulatively adds up to enormous differences in the dynamic arcs or the details of a particular song. Now, I have a desk job, which is often sometimes rather boring if you're not listening to music while you're doing it. And I primarily listened to all of these sets at work. And many times with this set in particular, I'd space out for a bit and I would just be brought back into awareness by some really awesome passage that brought a familiar song into a new light. Or I'd get to work and I'd start to pull up some music to listen to and I'd think, oh man, I listened to a gig from Starless every day this week. I don't know if another one will be that interesting. And then I would put one on and really just be swept away in it. Now, to be fair, the level of discovery can vary, and there's room more in some songs than others for that kind of variety. And when you listen to a set of this scale, you do get a sense of which songs are maybe more interesting night after night, right? It's not consistent across the board. And in fact, sometimes the songs with tighter arrangements or the more complex pieces get a bit more repetitive, even if strictly speaking, they're better written. So for instance, the middle section of Easy Money is always brilliant. As a studio piece, that song was never a particular favorite of mine, But that middle section, live, is just always a gradual opening of the gates of hell, right? But in a totally different way every time. Exiles is another one that works well in these sets. It has a particular way of emerging from chaos and periodically sinking back into it. But again, always sort of in a different way. And there's a lot of room in that song because it has a more open arrangement. There's a lot of room for little details in, guitar fills and drum fills, things like that. Schizoid Man, of course, is a highlight for any era of this band. The playing in the middle section is always, quite thrilling in very different ways. Conversely, the song Lament, the weakness of it becomes a little bit more apparent on repeated listen. When I went back and re-listened to this set, frankly, I did sometimes allow myself to skip that particular track. Or, Fracture, as great as it is so, immaculately put together that it does sound a bit more samey night to night. With, actually, on this set, some major exceptions, which is that there are a couple times when they play it with totally different sections, which eventually became a portion, I believe, of the song Starless on Red. I'll actually single out as well for special note here Dr. Diamond, which is a really fantastic song that never got a studio recording, and most of the existing versions of it are on this set. There's also a few that are on Road to Red. Every version of Dr. Diamond is a treasure as far as I'm concerned. It's also amazing, given the age of these gigs, how good the sound quality is. I'm not somebody who spends a lot of time listening to bootlegs for the most part, but for me, there was really no adjustment at all getting into this set. Obviously, it's not studio quality, right? But it has really all the clarity and power that you'd ever want. And there were very few times going through this set that I found sound quality to really be a barrier at all. Now, Road to Red, like I've said a couple times, is the same personnel, similar set list, same era. I've put this one first because, by the point of Road to Red, things had been practiced and worked out to an extent that there's a little bit less variation, right? There's more room here for surprising things like, as I mentioned, that added part of Fracture. Now, Road to Red is still absolute sheer joy, but if you have to choose between the two for money's sake, I'd actually sooner get this one, right? And by the time you're done with this one, you might be ready to take a little break from live Wet and Era Crimson before you spend another $200 or $300 for another 20-odd discs of it. All right, so that is the first part of my King Crimson box set series. Next week I'll be covering On and Off the Road, Sailor's Tales, and Heaven and Earth. I'll see everybody back in a couple weeks for those. In the meantime, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I do appreciate all that stuff. And check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your preferred streaming platform.